Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I'm Agi Keramidas and my mission is to inspire you to rise up, grow, stand out and take action towards the next level of your life. I interview leaders, influencers, entrepreneurs, authors, exceptional people who can and will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week and make sure you subscribe to the podcast to get the episodes as soon as they are released. In today's show, I am delighted to speak with John Skillen. Brian, you are a professional filmmaker, a writer, and international dance instructor. Your life has been strongly influenced by your many adventures around the world, but you say that the most profound one was your pilgrimage along the Camino de Santiago. That inspired you to write your first book, which has received awards and gone on to be an Amazon bestseller in several categories. You are just launching the second book in the series, and you are using the Kickstarter platform to raise the funds for the project, which is very interesting. Brian, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you here, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much. So am I. You know, the introduction made me feel like I was a secret agent. All these different identities. But yeah, no, I am thrilled to be here today. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Brian, I would love to start with some background, and your story, obviously, it's very diverse, but I would like to start with, I think, what was the first identity, as you said, that you picked up, and that was one of a dancer, and you have done very well with that, traveled around the world. And so my first question is, what inspired you to be a dancer?
Well, I'll tell you what, I always say God has a sense of humor, right? He made me obese when I was young and I became a dancer. He made me dyslexic and I became a writer. So let's start way back in the day. So I was about 15 years old.
Yeah.
I weighed over 220 pounds at like 5 foot tall. I was a brawler. I was getting into fights, heading down a bad path. And I watched this movie called Swing Kids. And I was like, what is this? That's amazing. Right. And they were doing swing dancing. And then, you know, we were talking a little bit about synchronicities before the show. Yeah. And then synchronistically, right after that, the next day or so, my next door neighbor came over and was like, they're giving free swing dance lessons at the Mercury Cafe. I was like, oh, great. There was only one problem. We were only 15 and we couldn't drive. So my friend Tony, he was dating a senior in high school. So she was 18 years old. So because he had the older chick, we were able to get a ride down with her. So we went and I fell in love with it. It was I could tell right away. I loved it. And it was just absolutely amazing. And I really feel like kind of dancing has saved my life, which is why I've made it one of my missions to share it with as many people as possible. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. So anyway, so here I am, a young, very large young man with a lot of aggression and other things going on. So swing dancing was perfect for me because I could flip people in the air. I'd just throw them around and it was awesome. And I had one day, I remember, I came home after dancing. It was around midnight. And I walked down the stairs and, you know, I thought, I want to be thin. I want women to want me and I want guys to want to be like me. Every dream for a 15-year-old. And I kind of declared that to the universe. And within like 6 months to a year, I had it all. You know, it was absolutely amazing. I lost 60 pounds. I became the it person at dancing. And like everybody was emulating me. I was like, this is amazing. At that moment, I realized reality is what you make it. And I was very, very fortunate to have that experience at 15 years old, 16 years old. Because by that time, I'd be going for a little while. But yeah. And also along that time, I picked up my first nickname, which was Lucky. And so Lucky became my dance identity. And Lucky was kind of like everything I wanted to be, right? So coming from this like just young man that I was beforehand, Lucky was, you know, the cool guy, the blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And the way that name came about is I went to a dance. Well, my friend Sean was like, let's make up nicknames. I was like, that is so stupid. And he's like, you be Lucky, I'll be Muggsy, right? And so we went to this, I know we were young. And we went to this dance and I introduced myself to one person. I'm like, hi, I'm Lucky. And she's like, what? And I was like, never mind. And then the next night I went to another dance and there's this beautiful blonde girl there. And I was like, hey, I'm Lucky. And she's like, Lucky, I like that. And so me and her started hanging out together a lot. And she called me Lucky. And then everybody else started calling me Lucky. And it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like I got into all the dances for free. I got my dance training for free. I went a whole year without paying for a meal. Nobody would let me pay. Everybody just kept taking me out. And so I manifested Lucky, essentially. And I've led a very serendipitous, lucky life. By the age of 18, I started teaching. By 20, I started teaching nationally. By 22, I started teaching internationally. I've done a little bit of film, commercial. I toured with big Broadway shows. I also helped develop 2 forms of dance and help popularize them around the world, which was pretty cool. So what I would do is I was touring like with big shows, and, it takes a lot of toll on your body. And I realized, I could make as much in a weekend that I could in a whole week of touring. Like I can make as much teaching dance. So I started gearing more of my business towards teaching rather than learning. What I did is I set up little economies around the world. So I would go to a place, I would teach with a local person, teach them to teach and give them music, because it was a brand new dance style that nobody was doing. And so I set up all these little economies around the world that had been feeding me for about 10 years, over 10 years, until the pandemic hit. So it was pretty amazing. And I could just make a call and be like, I want to go to London. And I would set up a tour going to London and, Scotland and Ireland and whatever. Or if I wanted to go to New Zealand, I'd contact my organizers in New Zealand. And so I really helped set up this network around the world that grew. And then my students began teaching, and their students began teaching, and they won all the competitions and blah, 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 blah. And before COVID, there was this huge ecosystem of people doing these dances. And it was pretty amazing. I didn't do it by myself. You never do anything on your own. I had all these amazing partners, like dance partners in different places. There was other teachers that we'd get together for teacher training, and we were kind of like the disciples of this dance and help spread it everywhere. And so it was really cool. We started a movement, and that movement helped so many people around the world. I had people that got married from the dance styles we taught. I had people who hated their jobs, and they started teaching dance, and they loved it. And then they influenced other people, and they understood what it was to have like a life of contribution, right? Because that's all it was. Dancing was my tool to do good in the world. I thought, I thought dance was my purpose in life, right? I thought my purpose in life was to dance, but I realized it was a tool. Like purposes never wear out, but tools do. And so my purpose is to help and inspire people.
It's great how you say it, that it was a tool that, a unique tool to you. And that's what I wanted to ask you, because for me, you were very blessed or fortunate, if I can use that word, to discover this tool or the passion, something that you're really good at and changed your life and shared and contributed. You discovered it at 15, so that really created a wave of, following, making it easy really to follow your passion. What do you think? Because
it wasn't easy. It's
easy.
Never,
yeah, maybe that was a poor choice of word, Brian.
Yeah,
yes.
I made a decision when I started. I wasn't good. I was terrible. Just like a lot of people when they start, because I've taught thousands of people around the world, it isn't usually the ones with the most talent that succeed. It's the ones that are the most persistent.
Yes.
And I was persistent, and I just went and I loved it. And I didn't have a choice. I mean, if I didn't go out dancing, I felt like I was sick. So dancing chose me. I didn't choose dancing. It was a calling. And I think what you really have to do is just be open to listening to that calling in life. The universe, God, is calling all the time. And you just have to listen to what that is and feel it. And people have learned to ignore that little voice in them, learn to ignore that passion, because they think that it can't happen, but it can. And that's what you're supposed to do. And that's how you're supposed to live. You're not supposed to live in a little box, just, trading your time for money. You're supposed to live. And, that's always what I've been. And one of the reasons why I came to that conclusion, I was going to I was doing some, I was going to become a neurologist, right? So at the same time I was dancing, I was studying in college, I got my undergrad and was working with people with brain injuries already, and I was going to go down that route. And then I had 3 friends die in 1 year. And I realized you are not promised tomorrow. And I decided to do what I loved, and I could always come back to school, and I could always go down that route, but I only had a very limited window to dance. And so, when I moved to New York, can I tell you a little funny story?
Sure.
Yeah. So like any dancer, you want to move to New York because that's the spot to be. So I moved out there, and I had maybe, not very much money at all in my bank account. I think about now, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And I move in, and I was moving into this place, and I had borrowed a friend's car, and I got a parking ticket. And this guy I was living with in Harlem, he had kind of like the Napoleon complex. He was a little dude, but just like, blah! He went out and he starts yelling at the police. And I was like, whoa, you're going to get arrested. Stop. And I was like, it'll be okay. God will take care of it. It'll be fine. Now, the parking ticket was $100, right? The very next day, I taught my first dance class in New York. And guess what? I got $100 tip on top of what I got paid for the lesson. And I went home and I showed the guy and I said, see, God will take care of it. It's fine. So I just approached everything with this absolute faith that I was taken care of. And God just kept delivering time and time again.
I love that message that you're sharing very much about listening to the calling when it comes and taking the action to do it and having faith, because there will be challenges or obstacles, difficulties, but by having faith and being persistent, as you said, it's the key the key element to that. And can you tell me? I would like to move a little bit forward. It's something. This is it's very intriguing on its own, and you mentioned already about the spirituality and God, and I'm going to discuss about that a little bit later. Can we move to when you actually did the pilgrimage and you had your big shift, a big realization?
Absolutely. So,
what made you do the pilgrimage in the first place?
Well, I'll tell you what. The very first time I did it was in 2008. And this is not the time that I got inspired to do the story, but I'll tell you a little side story with this before we begin. So I was on dance tour. I was in Spain. I had a couple extra weeks. I looked up things to do in Spain. And so it popped up and I knew nothing about it. And so what it is, it's the Camino de Santiago, which is an ancient pilgrim route that goes from many places in Europe and all ends in Santiago de Compostela, where the body of St. James is. And so, I knew nothing about it. And young, stupid kids, I love it. So I went, and I actually ended up getting onto something called the ancient route, which doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, it kind of does. Well, at the time, it wasn't very well marked. There was nobody doing it. So I was sleeping in, I got there, I didn't know what to do. I arrived, I was like, oh, crap, I don't know what to do next. I don't have any gear. I'm in the middle of Spain. I don't speak Spanish. What am I doing? And so I went to the church, and the priest there told me, go to the tourist office, get a passport, because you have to, these pilgrims passports, otherwise you can't stay in the hostels. So that first night I stayed in a 50-person hostel by myself. There was nobody there. And then the next day I start walking. I get hopelessly lost because it's not marked. Here I am in the middle of Spain, don't speak Spanish, completely lost. And the only conversation I had all day was a horse, because I didn't see anybody. And then I kept pushing myself harder and harder and harder. And luckily, I ended up finding eventually a clue. But by this point, I'd already pushed my body so hard that my knees started to hurt. And as a dancer, your knees are like the most valuable things, right? And so I start going, and but I pushed myself way too. I think I walked for 23 hours straight trying to find some place. And finally, I found a town. I slept there. I got back en route. But every day after that, my knees got progressively worse and worse and worse and worse, until the last day, I couldn't walk into Santiago. So I'd gone through all these turmoil to get there. And then the very last day, I couldn't walk, and I had to take a bus. And I was like, oh, you're kidding me. I just pushed my body so hard. Now I can't even complete this. I mean, thank God it was the end of my dance tour. Otherwise I would have been screwed. Like, but anyway, but I always think things happen for a reason. So here's something that looks just absolutely terrible in my eyes. And what happened was I took the bus into town. I had to use 2 sticks to like kind of hobble like a 90-year-old man. And I made it into the cathedral. And it's a massive cathedral and it's gorgeous. And I'm in there and I see this older lady sitting in one of the front pews. And it's just me and her and maybe like 3 other people in this huge church because it's not season. I mean, it's cold and whatever. And I go up and I sit with her and, you know, she starts crying and I just hold her. And I found out that her husband had died recently and she was taking this pilgrimage to heal from that. And she would have been absolutely alone weeping in that cathedral had I not been hurt and been able to sit there next to her, been able to be there and hold her when she was going through this just cathartic moment. And so what was something that seemed terrible actually just created this beautiful moment that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. The pain is past, but that moment is going to stick with me forever. And I'm sure it probably stuck with her too. And the thing is, after that, I vowed, I'm like, okay, I'm going to come back to finish. So fast forward, 2017, just got done out of a bad relationship. I was a wreck. And I was like, okay, don't know what I'm going to do next in life. I'm going to go walk the Camino de Santiago again. So once again, I'm on dance tour. I do it right this time. There's more stuff on the internet. There's maps. There's all this stuff. And I start going on the French route. And I get to this place called the Arc of Saint Antoine. And this place is just like this epic arc stretching up from above the Camino de Santiago. And it looks like it should be in Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings. I'm like, oh, somebody's got to write a story about this. This looks amazing. And I was like, okay, all right, whatever. I was just super inspired. And then just beyond that is a hilled city with a castle on top. I was like, what is this place? And so I got into town and they stamped my pilgrim's passport with a stamp and it had the cross of Jerusalem on it, which has 5 kind of Templar looking crosses on it. And I was like, the Knights Templar. And the hospitaler guy that was there that gave me the stamp was like, what do you know about the Templars? And I said, I don't know. What do you know about the Templars? And we got into this huge conversation and he told me all about the history of the Templars in that town and their history on the Camino, like right down to the hill of that city is actually hollowed out with Templar tunnels underneath of it. And he's like, you have to look for clues of the Templars. You know, they've left something here. And I was hooked. After that, the next morning I woke up, I took my dance shoes out of my backpack and I said, I'll trade these in for a story. And every day after that, the book played like a movie in my head. The people I saw became characters in the book. The experiences I had came into the book. I kept seeing all this weird Templar symbology that I was like, well, that's got to be part of the code. And so it just kind of worked itself in my brain. And every morning I would dictate into my phone kind of this waking dream that I was having of this book. And I finally did that. I have some other great stories about that Camino too, but we can maybe come back to that later. And so like that really gave me the inspiration to do the book. There's only one problem. I never expected to write a book. I grew up with dyslexia in the 3rd grade reading and spelling level in high school. Like, you know, you're like, really, God, me? Why? Like, come on, really? And so writing this book has kind of been my re-education of the English language. I had to teach myself where commas went and apostrophes and like all this stuff. And then letters would switch all the time in my head. But needless to say, what I did once again is the people who succeed are the ones that commit. So I committed to writing 2,000 words a day, no matter what. And I was able to write this 100,000 word book in like 2.5 months. And I thought it was the best thing in the world. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I shared it with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And she's like, actually, this needs a little work. Thank God for her. And so I may have written the book, like the initial book, in like 3 months, but then I spent 3 years honing my craft of becoming a writer, getting all the mentorship I could, learning every I could. I was a voracious learner. And so fast forward, I send out 50 query letters to agents And I was like, oh, they're so going to take this book. Oh, I can feel it. I feel it. Right. And I got back 2 rejection letters, and, 48 or 49 other agents didn't even bother to write back to me. And so at this point, I felt like God gave me that book. I mean, so I was like, and I feel like if God gives you something, you have a responsibility to follow it through. And so I felt like this is my responsibility. I was given this task, and I'm going to follow it through, and I'm going to follow it through with faith. And so what I did is I turned to a tool that I've used over the past 10 years to raise over $100,000 for my projects and the projects of others, which is Kickstarter. And so in the middle of the pandemic, my income stream from dance is completely cut off. So like my 95% of my income is completely gone. And I'm walking out on faith with this book, and I'm like, okay, it's time. And so we launched the Kickstarter for the book. We were a great success. We raised $10,000, which is, we asked for 8, we raised 10. And I was able to pay for all the publishing. I was able to pay for an editor. We were able to pay for everything. And since then, the book's gone on, like you said in the intro, to become an Amazon bestseller in several categories. And we also won an 𝗕𝗂𝗏 Award which is one of the most prestigious awards in the self-publishing world. And we won it in the spiritual fiction category, which I'm elated about, because that's got books in it like The Alchemist and the 𝗪𝗪𝗪 and all these other books. And so, I'm hoping my book becomes, or my series becomes that. And my book is pretty much my invitation for people to come have the adventure of a lifetime on the Camino de Santiago.
Brian, there is something I really want to ask you, and I'm going to go back a little bit with what you were saying. You said earlier about dancing that you knew that you had to do it because you were feeling unwell if you were not dancing, you were feeling sick. Tell me, how did you know? What was your translation, your interpretation that this book is what I'm meant to be doing? Because you said that you were committed and you had faith and all that. My question is, when does one know that this is really my mission, my purpose, or my vehicle?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to give it everything I got, despite my fears, my insecurities, what other people say, or what my background is.
Yeah, absolutely. So it took me a long time to kind of figure out some stuff. I got lucky with the first one, with the dancing, right? But with dancing, I got to this point
yes.
where with dancing, I got to the point where I'd achieved everything I wanted to, and I'd helped thousands of people and changed thousands of lives. But I feel when you achieve something, God gives you a bigger tool to reach more people, right? And so I've come up with this phrase that says, tools wear out, but a purpose never does, right? So tools wear out, but a purpose never does. And what I mean by that was dancing was my tool. What my actual purpose was to help and inspire people. And so God gave me the tool of doing a movie, which, screened at Lincoln Center and played all over the world. He gave me that tool. Awesome. And now he gave me the tool of this book. He's like, this is your next tool that you can reach a lot of people with and do a lot of good. You can call people to have the adventure of a lifetime. So you ask, what was that moment when I knew that this was my next calling? Well, it was the moment when I traded in those shoes. I got to say, I was willing to burn my bridges, so to speak, right? I burned my bridges, part of my bridges, by giving them those shoes. And that was my commitment to it. And I think when you commit to something, everything just starts opening up for you. And like things just start appearing. Like I could have ignored it. I could have completely ignored it, but God just gave me something. I think God gives you something every day. Every day there's something that you can tell I'm a person of faith, right? There's every day you can see this, but anyways, so for me, the way I knew was after that conversation, I had this longing in my soul. So there's another thing that I say too, that's listening empathically to yourself and listening empathically to the universe, right? So listening empathically to yourself is that little voice inside you that calls to you. That's like, I want you to do this. And it may be silent at sometimes, but it's persistent, or it could be loud and right in your face, but you can choose to listen to that voice or not. Then the other one is listening empathically to the universe. And that's when synchronicities and signs and other things start to appear. So with this book, I had that little voice that said, my God, somebody's got to write a story about this. And it didn't really feel like my voice. You know, it was like that when inspiration takes you. And then after that, I started listening empathically to the universe. There was this sign of this old man that stamped my passport, that then knew everything about the Templars, like everything. And then there was the next day meeting these people who became characters. And the next day after that, seeing this like weird green men in this church. And that's, maybe I should use a different example than that, but seeing these weird symbologies in this church that, you know, I happen to know a little about. And I was like, wow. And so I could have chosen not to listen to it. I mean, I could have chosen to have a completely different experience, right? Everything would have been there, but I would have missed it. It's like, it's like, you know, when you, on the Camino, there's all these little yellow arrows that you follow that direct you. Mm-hmm. And if you're just a visitor to that city, you'll see those arrows and think, oh, somebody put some graffiti here, or like, what are these? But when you're walking the Camino and that's your purpose, you see those little arrows and they lead you to exactly where you need to go. Mm-hmm. And the only thing you have to do in life is follow that next little arrow. And that's what it was for this book. It was like, I don't know, I know my end destination that I want. I don't know how in the heck I'm going to get there because I have X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to follow each little arrow, each little person, each little sign that points me to the right direction to get to where I am now. And, you know, I've been very thankful to do this book. And my goal with this book is to inspire 1 million people to go walk the Camino de Santiago. I want 1 million people to go there, have a life-changing experience, and bring that experience to the world so they can affect the lives of others. You know, it's all about contribution. And this is my contribution to the world now. And I want that to just take people, shake them out of their ordinary lives, shake them into adventure, shake them to realizing there's so much more out there. And for them to then be that light that sparks somebody else and sparks somebody else and sparks somebody else. Like, that's it.
I love your mission and how you share it. And I was telling you before we started recording that when one is contributing using their own unique gifts, what they really can bring to the world, then that's all the magic when it's happening. And you were saying, and I will repeat that because I would like the listeners to ponder on that for a moment, that there are these messages, these signs that come into our life every day, and we can choose to listen to them or not. And there are good things, good or what we perceive to be good anyway, and things that are taking us down a path that we don't like. And we can choose to listen to both of them. The problem is that when we don't listen, or when we choose not to listen, things kind of escalate down the line. So when you listen to good things, even better good things happening down the line. It spirals up. If you don't listen to the negative things that are coming your way from around, from the universe, if you want, then they tend to get louder and louder until you really pay attention. So it's just a thought which came to mind. It's very important to pick up though that sense that, wow, this has a meaning. It has if we give it, if we take that meaning and see it like that. It's Absolutely. Great to be able to, to connect with that inside, that intuition, and really feel it, not think it, feel it that this is the right thing for me. It came, and we were talking about how we met and how we arranged to do this in such a short notice. Because
and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to be here.
Likewise, I mean, this happened synchronistically. I mean, there is no other way for me to explain it in a better way. It's exactly like that.
And you got to listen to those signs. You know, like when those synchronicities happen, you got to listen to them and go. You know, and one other thing, good thing, bad thing, you know, it's like, I always think back to, there's a saying, I love 𝗵𝗺 𝗫𝗃. For all you listeners out there, if you've never read 𝗵𝗺 𝗫𝗃, read her. She's amazing. I put some of her philosophy into my books too, and give her credit, obviously. But like the thing is, she has a saying that says, everything happens for you, not to you. Mm-hmm. Right. And if you start changing your perspective like that, everything happens for you, not to you. And so like when I was injured, didn't know if I was going to dance again because my knees were effed. And I met that lady in the church, like that happened for me, not to me. It wasn't a bad thing that happened to me. It was something that God gave me so I could have another experience. And that experience needed to teach me something to go someplace. And reality will always kind of bring you back onto that path. Now you can resist it, like you said, and you'll have a harder lesson to learn or a more difficult, or you can follow that and go through. And but if you can just switch that one thought in your head, and I noticed Tony used it in the training that we were listening to within Project Next. Yeah. But yeah, he used happening for you, not to you. But that's like Byron Katie has been saying that for a long time. And I just love thinking about that, and loving reality, loving whatever comes, because you know what? I don't know. There's a parable I put in here. So there's a guy, right? And he finds this wild horse that just shows up at the house, and all the villagers are like, "Oh, what good fortune! You have this horse that just appeared out of nowhere." And the guy says, "Well, good fortune, bad fortune. We shall see." The next day, the guy's son is training the horse, and he falls off and he breaks his arm. And the villagers are like, "Oh, what bad fortune! That horse is a curse." And the old man says, "Good fortune, bad fortune. We shall see." Then the next day, the army comes, and they want all able-bodied men to come fight in the war. And the villagers say, "Oh, what great fortune you're having, because your son can't go fight now." And he says, "Well, good fortune, bad fortune, we shall see." And, you can never tell what's going to be good fortune or bad fortune. Like some of the most amazing times in my life happened directly after something that looks impossible. Like usually it's breakups. Like I made my movie after I went through a breakup. Like I finished, I finally got the balls to run a Kickstarter for it. And that's how I funded my movie as well, was through Kickstarter. But I was finally pushed to that point where I was going to take action. I was too comfortable, in whatever. And I also think that too with the pandemic, like I said, 90% of my business was killed by the pandemic with going around the world teaching dance and whatnot. And, but I realized looking back, it would have taken something that big to spur the action in me to do the Kickstarter for this book and actually finish it and get it done. So what looked like terrible, right, actually turned into something absolutely beautiful. But it would take something that big to reset my life so I can get back onto the next purpose that I'm being called for.
What you said about life happening for us, if one really understands what that means, then everything changes. Everything changes in the way we perceive things. I also wanted to ask you, Brian, because you mentioned the Kickstarter, and I'm very curious to find out how does that work specifically in the terms of publishing a book, because I had heard of Kickstarter before for projects, but if you want to give us a brief overview of how, let's say that I would like to create a book. I have an idea, but I have certainly not any spare money to go down that route. So how does that work?
Absolutely. So that's exactly what I'm planning to do for one of my next pieces of service. So number one, you'll go to Facebook and look up Kickstarter to Amazon bestseller. So that's the new group that I've set up for people who are in that situation, that have this book on their heart, but they don't necessarily have the finances to get it done. It's one of my next missions with this. The book is now leading me to this, where I can do more service and be more great. I've grown out of one tool, going on to the next tool, so to speak.
What you say about
and so I'm committed now to helping authors that want to go from Kickstarter to Amazon bestseller, especially those that have been rejected by traditional publishers, just like my book was. I want to let those people know that their book is good enough and that they are good enough, and that opinion doesn't matter, not to listen to it. And you have it inside you to produce this book into the world. So what you do first, it's a process. You have to put your work in. So what you do first is, you start building a little bit of hype for your book by doing A/B testing for different things like a cover, whatnot, You start going through, then that way gradually people start to know, oh, so-and-so wants to be an author. Oh, so-and-so is, so you start planting seeds within your community. You join other groups too. And we have modules, we're gonna have modules in my course on each step of this. So I think it's a 7-step program that we're doing. I might add more as we're going, but we're currently building it right now. But yeah, so first you just plant the seeds. So everybody in your community starts getting these little hints that you're becoming a writer. And then like about a week before, or during this time, you're building your Kickstarter. And so it takes maybe 2 weeks to build your Kickstarter all the way out. And so then on launch day, you set up an echo chamber, which is, you get a group of people to help you share your information with everybody. You've planted these seeds that we teach about how to plant. And now you have a community of supporters ready. Like all you need is 10 to 15 people to get started. And then those 10 to 15 people grow exponentially out and out and out. And you leverage their networks, you leverage other networks that you may be a part of. It's all about leverage and social capital. So anyways, so then you launch your Kickstarter. And when you launch, you do a little launch party, right? And so we just launched our Kickstarter for our second book like yesterday. And we had the day from, oh my goodness, I can't even tell you, so many technical difficulties. I was trying to record the session, the launch for people in our group, and it totally killed my computer. So we had to record, switch to a phone. And then at that same time, Facebook wasn't working. And then the Kickstarter was kicking stuff like media off. Something was happening yesterday with computing cloud systems around the world. They were just effed right at the time that we were launching.
That's a message, something to listen to, whatever that might mean. But it's not a random occurrence.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think for me, it was just faith, a test of faith. I was like, you know what? My saying for this, recently, the past few days is if God is with me, who can stand against me? And anytime something comes up, that is my positive affirmation that I've replaced negative beliefs with. If something comes up, well, if God's with me, this can't stand against me. Who cares? Facebook shut down. Who cares? Kickstarter's dropping our photos. I'm still going to do this. I'm going to go forward with this. And you know what happened? Within we haven't been running 24 hours and we're already 40% funded.
Awesome.
40%. I mean, we've raised almost $4,000 so far in just that short amount of time. And, we also became one of the coolest things with Kickstarter is the projects we love. So every day there's thousands of projects being submitted to Kickstarter. Ours got chosen as a project we love. And when they do that, they bump you up in the algorithms and put you in prime seating and whatnot. So here we are. We've had this really trying day trying to get this launch. And then, we just move forward with that faith, with that confidence. God's with me, who can stand against me? And we moved forward through it, and we're here, and we're now running it. We're on day 2. I have this wonderful interview that I'm doing here with you right now, which is amazing, which I hope reaches a lot of people. So anyways, so back to the process. So then you launch your Kickstarter, and the first 48 hours are the most important. And so that's the time that you really go through, you keep people up. You have to make your Kickstarter. There's a lot of steps, that I'm kind of just going over. Yeah. And so then you run it. You want to set it up for 30 days. Projects that run longer than 30 days often fail. So a 30-day window is what you recommend best. And so those first 2 days are the big push, and then you have 28 other days to keep pushing and going through.
For me, what a very important insight from what you're telling me is that there are ways in the end to launch your project. If it's a book, it's a book. If it is another project, there are ways that you can be resourceful and use other people's money who want to fund this because they resonate in one shape or form. So don't let that stand in the way of not doing something that you're really passionate about. There is a way, and Kickstarter, I think it's a wonderful example of that.
And so my thing, our course is called Kickstarter to Amazon Bestseller, how to fund the publishing process, how to fund your book with pre-sales. And that's all we're doing, is we're gathering a whole bunch of pre-sales for our book. And then we're going to launch the book. And guess what? I could pay for the publishing. We could do that. I mean, I would have to go in debt. One person told me that they went into debt, like taking out a loan to publish the book. And I thought, my God, I need to.
It depends on the project, though, Brian. It depends on the project as well. Some projects you can get into debt. Some other projects, very big ones, you won't be able to do that.
I mean, it's arguable.
Yes, of course it is.
But let me just elaborate a little more here. So so what you're doing is really pre-selling like a whole bunch of sales for your book before it goes. And then not only do you raise the money, the other coolest part is that you've now created a community around your book, which is more important than the money that you've raised. Because that community is going to go tell everybody else about your book. Mm-hmm. They're going to be the ones giving you reviews on Amazon, which bump you up into the Amazon algorithms. They're the ones that are going to be there. So here that's why my method of going from Kickstarter to Amazon bestseller. How do we get to Amazon bestseller? Well, it was because we had a community of support behind us that we built on Kickstarter. The Kickstarter was like a giant commercial for our book. Now, as you said, like I've helped raise money for films. The first one raised $30,000 in 30 days for my first film. That was the very first Kickstarter that I did. After that, I helped a musician raise like $20 some odd thousand for doing his album. I coached him. Then we did another film. We raised $60,000 or so, plus a whole bunch of private contributors after that. And then I helped with another project and another project. And so people kept coming to me, asking me, will you help me run my Kickstarter? And so I figured
another tool as well in your...
Exactly. That's God talking to you again. He's like, you see, there's people that need this. You see, there's people you can help. You see, and so I want to help people use the tool of Kickstarter to take their books off their computers and into readers' hands.
Awesome.
Brian,
let me also ask you some quick fire questions to start wrapping things up. And my first one to you is, what does personal development mean to you?
Personal development. I think it's always about learning, keep learning and just having that desire and that curiosity to keep going. It's learning and persisting, right? So you always are open and curious, and then you just persist and persist and persist and persist. And one of the most important things I ever learned was how I learn. And I recommend everybody out there to learn your learning style. Because the moment, it wasn't that I was, I had to teach myself how to learn. Like I'm a visual kinesthetic person. So I have to learn by seeing and doing, right? I can't, if somebody sits there and lectures to me, I can't absorb it. But if I go in there and I do it and I go through like that, then I can learn. And the moment I learned how I learned, changed my whole life around. Mm-hmm. And so personal development for me, I think begins with learning. And beginning with learning, learn how you learn so that you can be more efficient with your learning and you can be more persistent with your learning. And so I think that's a big part of that.
It's very valuable, what you just shared. And let's say you could go back in time and meet your 18-year-old self and give him one piece of advice. What would you say?
One piece of advice. Can I give two pieces of advice?
If you must.
One in relational, one in business. Relational one is marry someone who's kind. So my wife is the kindest, most wonderful person that I've met. And it makes such a difference when you're with somebody kind. Before that, it was really interesting. Before that, I had somebody who I thought was the perfect woman. I mean, everything on paper, like multimillionaire, beautiful, blah, 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 blah. But, she wasn't kind in that way. She was maybe kind in other ways, but not in the way that my wife is kind. And for me, that is so much more valuable than anything else, just being with somebody who's kind, because they will be there for you. They'll take care of you. I mean, as we talked about earlier, she's my partner in everything we do. Like, she may not be here on the call, but I'll tell you what, she's working social media right now or something, so we're partners. We work together. We're two boats heading the same direction, which is financial freedom and just being able to live freely. Like, we both want to be free. And so we're two boats moving that direction. Whatever tool we use to get there, that's awesome. And she's kind, I'm kind, we're kind. we're just kind. So 18-year-old self, marry somebody who's kind. And that's another saying with the Camino. The Camino always provides not exactly what you need, but not always what you want, but exactly what you need to fill your life's purpose. And so it's the same with that. Like I thought I wanted one thing, but I actually needed something completely different, And so there's that. I'll leave that as my advice. That's fine. Well, I'll just do what I took a long time on that.
So it's valuable. And I actually wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier on about learning your learning style, and that is a great, for me, actionable item, something that the listener can take away and figure that out. If I were to ask you for one more actionable item from this conversation that we had today, something to share with the listener, what could they do today, tomorrow, to start making a shift in their progress and their journey?
Commit. The moment you commit, listen to that little voice inside you, that voice that's saying, I want you to write this book, or, go do this. Commit to it. Nothing happens if you don't commit. And so that would be my advice. Just commit to it. Burn your bridges. Responsibly burn your bridges.
Of course.
but just commit to an action and follow through on it. And there's a difference between wanting to do something and committing to doing something. And I think our generation, this generation right now, has a big lack of commitment, because it's with cell phones. You don't have to meet someplace at a specific time. You can just call them and be like, hey, I'm going to be 10 minutes late. Where back in the day, you would just take off. Okay, Susie's not showing up. I'm out of here. You'd wait for your hour, your half hour. If they didn't show, then you were gone. And so people had to have this sense of integrity, this sense of commitment. I think that's kind of been lost in our culture. And so I think that's why we have a bunch of people running around not knowing what they're doing in some cases. Yes,
many people, unfortunately. Brian, how can people connect with you and find out more? Where will you direct people?
Yeah, absolutely. So find me on Facebook, Brian Lucky Skillen. Our Facebook group for Kickstarter to Amazon bestseller is just that, Kickstarter to Amazon bestseller on Facebook. And please join the group. We're just starting now, but as we're running this Kickstarter, I'm going to be running people through the steps we're taking. And then we're going to be doing a course later on as well. So, but the only way to get there is to join that group. You can find us on Kickstarter. Our Kickstarter is Back Through a Field of Stars, which is the book. So we're now crowdfunding book 2 in my series, which is amazing, as I said earlier. And I'm just overwhelmed at the support and love we're getting from people. And then our website is throughafieldstars.com, which talks about the whole trilogy. And those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me.
And there is a third book that is coming. It's a trilogy, if I understand correctly. So I want to wish you all the very best with, fulfilling this work. This I think it's extremely important, and for many reasons, but one reason being that it is what you're called to contribute to the world. So that makes it extremely important on its own, regardless of the million people or not. All the very best. I really enjoyed our conversation, Brian. Any last parting words?
Gandhi says, be the change you want to see in the world. So go out there, commit, and just be that change. And it's about contribution and giving to other people. So give your gift to the world.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and rate it on Apple Podcasts. And also share this episode with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want to find out more about what I do and gain access to exclusive content, join my Facebook group Personal Development Mastery. The link is in the show notes, or you can simply type bit.ly/PDM group. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in.